time are we? Oh.
How you doing, Mr. Chairman?
Hello. How are you doing?
How's it going? This is yours, I assume?
No, that one's yours.
Is this yours?
That one's yours.
It's not mine.
Mine's right here.
Oh, okay. That's right. Yeah, no, okay. I forget how high-tech we become.
This hearing of the Committee on Agriculture entitled Focus on the Farm, A View from the Barnyard will come to order. I'd like to welcome everybody here this morning. This is the final hearing in our Farm Economy series. Each of the other 5 subcommittees has examined the growing pressure in rural America from the perspective of their jurisdictions, and today we're going to look at it from our jurisdiction. Farmers are currently facing a steep drop in commodity prices, resulting in the largest 3-year decline in net farm income since the Great Depression. Razor-tight margins are likewise making producers even more vulnerable to factors that impact cost of production, including additional regulatory burdens. At this point, the real question is, where do we go from here if things do not improve? In this final hearing in the series, we will focus primarily on the market outlook for the livestock, dairy, and poultry sectors. Now, prices are down from 2014 across the livestock sector, and market projections for 2017 suggest prices will remain less than favorable. The reality is the livestock sector, like others, faces lower prices. These pressures are further aggravated by regulatory burdens as well as pest and disease outbreaks. In this subcommittee, we have previously examined the threats from and vulnerabilities to livestock diseases such as highly pathogenic avian influenza and foot and mouth disease. Witnesses at today's hearing will raise concerns with recent as well as soon-to-be proposed regulations. The Agriculture Committee has been actively engaged in oversight on some of these, like the EPA's WOTUS rule. Others we've not had to deal with for quite some time, but now find that they are back on the table. Most notably, Secretary Vilsack recently announced that proposed GIPSA regulations, which Congress has repeatedly blocked, are once again in the works. It concerns many of us that the USDA is trying again to interfere with livestock markets. These specific GIPSA regulations were originally proposed in 2010. The economic analysis done at that time indicated that these rules would extract more than $1 billion in value from the livestock markets if they were implemented. Congress wisely chose to block those rules. And Congress continued to do so until last year when, with the understanding and commitment that the USDA had no intention of revisiting these bad ideas, the seemingly pro forma prohibition on any USDA action related to them was allowed to lapse. It remains unclear why the Secretary has decided to once again move forward with these ill-conceived proposals, other than it seems to me to be the standard operating procedure of this administration in general. When Congress doesn't pass laws the administration wants, they issue rules and regulations to circumvent the legislative branch. Our founding fathers created a representative government for a reason. If it had been their desire for the American people to be governed by executive decrees, they wouldn't have created a legislative branch in the first place. While this is not the last time this subcommittee will discuss these issues, it is my hope that the testimony we received today will shed light on the disastrous consequences this type of intrusion will have in the already weak livestock markets. As we discuss the outlook for the livestock markets, it's important to understand the positive dynamic created by the diverse marketing arrangements that have been developed over the past several decades. It's unfortunate that the regulatory proposals the Secretary is now attempting to finalize would likely wipe away these decades of advancement. Fortunately, the House Appropriations Committee has once again adopted language that would prevent the Secretary from moving forward. It is my hope that this language is included in the appropriations legislation Congress sends to the President for his signature later this year. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today and look forward to your testimony. I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Costa, for any opening comments he may have.
Thank you very much, Chairman Reuser and members of the subcommittee for this timely subcommittee hearing this morning. I appreciate the witnesses that are here to have the opportunity to get your perspective on the current farm economy and as it impacts, as we like to say, there at the farm gate or the barnyard throughout America. There are numerous issues that we are aware of that I suspect we will hear testimony this morning regarding the impacts and the views of American ranchers, dairy producers, others in the processing of food that we put on America's dinner table every night. They involve the safest beef, poultry, and pork that is produced anywhere in the world, clearly. And I think, I will come back to that because oftentimes we get into the details of the challenges we're facing, but what we forget is that nobody does it better, to quote an old Paul McCartney song, than the American farmer. Nobody does it better in terms of producing the highest level of quality of beef and poultry and dairy products that Americans, consumers, every night are able to have as a part of their diet, and if done properly, the healthiest diet at the most cost-effective level that involves health safety anywhere in the world, and that gets lost in terms of the average amount that the American consumer pays of their monthly income that actually goes to purchase of the food that they and their families consume. We've all got stories to tell here as it relates to impacts of the regulatory framework. And I'm one of those that believe that there's a proper balance. Clearly, the United States Department of Agriculture, the Food and Drug Administration, all of those are agencies that we have worked with historically to try to ensure to have the imprimatur and the credibility that, in fact, everything that we do in the American farmland is of the highest quality, and that we protect health and safety as it relates to the American public. But there is always the challenge of overreaching. And let me just give you a few examples that we've been engaged in here with the subcommittee and the full committee that I think is overreaching. And as a former speaker one time said, all politics is local. Well, let me give you some local examples. In California, we have, as everyone knows, faced the worst drought on record, and the depth of our challenges for our ranchers and dairy producers is staggering, and all of you have heard about it. And some of us have lived it if you represent ground zero where the devastating drought has occurred. There always have been and there always will be a number of competing demands in California, as in other western states, on our water systems. But it is clear that the regulatory actions that have taken place over the last 4 years have made a bad situation worse. We continue to see farm workers who usually have tired hands from working out in the fields, standing in line with food banks, for food banks to feed their families. I mean, it is absolutely beyond frustrating when you see some of the hardest working people you ever meet in your lives in some of the richest agricultural regions in the world standing in food lines. The business that we help support the agriculture economy in California has been devastated as a result of this regulatory drought combined with 4 of the driest years we've had on record. However, this crisis that has touched every Californian has the potential to impact food prices for every American if we do not do something to address the regulatory burdens imposed upon these farmers, these processors. Clearly, we can't change the weather, and while farmers like to talk about it, but we can change the course on how the regulatory environment intersects and make it much more effective. The conclusion, obviously, that we're dealing with is that there are other stories that both our dairymen, poultry, and livestock operators struggle with in dealing with government policies. Mr. Chairman, you and I and other members of this subcommittee and the full committee were proud to work with Chairman Conway and many of our colleagues to finally repeal the mandatory county of origin labeling rules. But that's just one example of rules and regulations. At the threat of Canada and Mexico imposing tariffs that would have been very, very harmful. The renewable fuel standard is another area with the grain inspection and packer and stockyard rules, which continues to be problematic. And I know some of my colleagues here, we differ on that issue, but representing beef, poultry, and dairy industries, we have to deal with the challenges of the impacts of price distortion that takes place as a result, I believe, of the RFS standards. But there are a host of other regulations that we're going to have to continue to deal with. I know the witnesses here will offer their own suggestions on changes that we ought to make as it relates to America's livestock industry, America's poultry industry, America's dairy industry, all of those which are critical to the ability for us to not only produce, again, the safest food anywhere in the world at the most cost-effective rate to the American consumers, which is always the goal of American farmers and ranchers. And again, no one does it better. So, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to the testimony of the witnesses and as we hear their thoughts and suggestions on how we can do a better job.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. I would like to welcome and appreciate having the ranking member of the full committee here, Colin Peterson, for any remarks that he might have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be brief. And I want to thank the witnesses, and I'm going to concentrate on dairy. I don't want to minimize your concerns, the other witnesses, and I'm looking forward to your testimony. But, you know, are getting into a situation now in dairy where we're, you know, getting squeezed like we are in the rest of agriculture. And, you know, the new margin protection program, I've been disappointed in the level of participation. And I've been disappointed in some of the comments that I've gotten from my constituents about why they didn't sign up. And the reason is, they tell me, because they didn't think they'd get any money out of it. You know, and, you know, it's, I guess, understandable. They've been used to a different program that paid when a certain amount when things went down. But, you know, this is an insurance program. It's not a government payment program. You know, and, you know, you don't insure your house hoping that it's going to burn down. You know, so somehow or another, we've got to try to figure out how we can get better participation. One thing is curious to me is why it appears that larger producers who pay more are buying up more coverage than smaller producers who pay less. You know, I don't quite understand exactly what's going on there, but, you know, one of the things we learned out of all of this is it's not a good idea to write farm programs when prices are high. You know, you know, so the point of it, I guess, is that I think we need to spend a considerable amount of time between now and the Farm Bill focusing on this and figuring out what went wrong, what we can do to improve the situation, look at all the different options, including possibly moving this over to RMA as opposed to FSA. You know, all of these different ideas, I think, need to be examined, because if we get a situation with $10 milk and we have the kind of participation we got going on right now, it's going to be a disaster. And there isn't going to be money to bail people out, I don't believe. You know, and the last thing that I'm curious about, and I had a chance to talk to Dr. Brown yesterday, but I forgot to maybe hear when we get into questions, but in crop farming, you know, the banker is going to insist on you buying insurance. And that's a given. You know, you don't get financed unless you have insurance, pretty much, unless you're pretty well off. So I don't think that is going on with the margin protection programs, and I don't know exactly why that is. And as margins get tighter, are the bankers going to move in and start saying that these guys have to buy it? Or, you know, I think that's another thing we have to look at. But, you know, I just understand that there's concerns out there and that people are getting into a tight situation, and we got to make sure we've got a risk management program that works for dairy, and I look forward to working with all of you to do that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. The chair would request that other members submit their opening statements for the record so the witnesses may begin their testimony and to ensure that there is ample time for questions. I'd like to welcome our witnesses to the table. Greatly appreciate you being here today. Our first is Dr. David Anderson, professor at Texas A&M University there in College Station, Texas. I'd now like to recognize Ms. Hartzler from Missouri to introduce a couple witnesses that she has from her home state.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are very excited to have two experts today from Missouri here, and it's Dr. Scott Brown and Mr. Randy Mooney. Dr. Scott Brown is an assistant extension professor at the University of Missouri's Ag Econ Department and the MU's State Extension Agriculture economist. And Scott has worked with U.S. Congress over the past 2 decades on dairy and livestock policies in front of both the House and the Senate Agriculture Committees. Some of you may remember seeing him when we were talking about the Farm Bill. He was here. Dr. Brown received his doctorate in agriculture economics from the University of Missouri and his bachelor's in agriculture business from Northwest Missouri State University. And like myself, Scott grew up on a diversified row crop and livestock farm. So we're really glad to have you back. We're also glad to have Mr. Randy Mooney here from just outside my district, used to be part of my district, but we still consider you part of us, and we're very, very proud of you. He currently serves as chairman of the National Milk Producers Federation and operates the Mooney Dairy in Rogersville, Missouri, with his wife, Jan. Randy was elected chairman of Dairy Farmers of America's Board of Directors in 2010, and in addition, Randy serves on the boards of several dairy organizations, including Missouri State Milk Board, Dairy Management Incorporated, Highland Dairy, and the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy. So Randy's expertise in the dairy industry is well known, and we're really proud to have you here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Hartzler. Also like to introduce Mr. John Zimmerman from Northfield, Minnesota, on behalf of the National Turkey Federation. We have from my home district, David Herring from Newton Grove, North Carolina, here on behalf of the National Pork Producers Council. David and I have known each other for a long, long time. David, great to see you. Always great to have you here and look forward to your testimony. And Mr. Tracy Bruner, Cow Camp Feed Yard from, is it Ramona, I guess, Kansas, on behalf of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Mr. Anderson, we'll start when you're ready.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Would you yield for a moment?
Absolutely.
I just want to let the panel members know and the audience that I have another hearing taking place here in 10 minutes with the Natural Resources Subcommittee on Water, and I have a piece of legislation up, and there is a members panel, and I will have to obviously be there. And I intend to come back, but please do not take any offense. We have your testimony, and I do have a couple of questions here, and if I'm not able to come back, we'll submit them for the record. But I do appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. Mr. Anderson, when you're ready.
Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Costa, members of the subcommittee, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today to testify representing the Agriculture and Food Policy Center at Texas A&M University. While often focusing on Title I commodities, the Farm Bill has direct impacts on the livestock industry as well. In particular, I'd mention the Livestock Indemnity Program and the Livestock Forage Disaster Program. Both have been important programs for livestock producers, providing financial assistance to producers really trying to survive unique catastrophic weather events, whether it's the record drought in the Southern Plains or Winter Storm Goliath, for instance. Crop insurance is not just a crop product. There are livestock-related products, whether it's livestock risk protection for feeder and fed cattle, hogs and lamb. Livestock gross margin for dairy is another product that has been available also. I'd like to mention that many of these Farm Bill and other policy issues are related. Insurance products often rely on futures market prices, for instance, the LGM dairy program, LRP for cattle and hogs, yet questions about the efficacy of the futures market may have important impacts on these mainstays of the producer safety net. Price reporting and information is related as well. Interpretation and implementation of price reporting has become a critical issue in some markets. Markets and products change over time, making flexibility in this implementation an important consideration, including evaluating confidentiality rules. The operation of live cattle and feeder cattle futures contracts has been the subject of a lot of concern across the industry. Areas of concern include volatility, the speed of transactions, the role of high-frequency trading, outright cheating, and whether or not the futures market is actually broken and no longer works as an effective price risk management tool. And I think there's a lot of areas where there's some needed research on all of those issues. Cattle prices have certainly declined from their record peak. I think it's worth remembering that markets and incentives work. Record high prices and drought recovery have provided the profit incentive to increase production of cows, calves, and beef. Increased production leads to lower prices. Certainly beef production has increased year over year. Increasing beef imports and reduced exports have had the net effect of adding about 750 million pounds to our market in 2015. And finally, large financial losses by cattle feeders forced them to finally bid lower for feeder cattle prices. The decline in cattle numbers to multi-decade lows by 2014 meant that the industry had an overcapacity problem in feeding and meat packing. As cattle numbers increase, there are more cattle chasing a smaller capacity, and that also pressures cattle prices. Trade is more important than ever to all of our livestock, poultry, and dairy sectors. These industries export anywhere from 10 to over 20% equivalent of our domestic production. Any events that reduce exports, often out of our control, leave us with lower prices. Yet imports are also important. The lamb industry is dealing with record imports of lamb from Australia and New Zealand. Opening new markets and reopening old markets are critically important to our livestock and dairy industries. Our domestic livestock sector is the main customer for most of our crops. And difficult times on the crop side due to low prices mean livestock producers are paying low prices for feed, but as meat production surges due to lower production costs, meat and livestock prices are going to decline. The Farm Bill safety net that aids crop farmers is also aiding suppliers of feed for all of our livestock, and it was not long ago that record high feed costs created huge financial losses across livestock agriculture, forcing bankruptcies and many to go out of business. So the health of crop and livestock producers are intertwined. Many livestock producers are also crop farmers, whether it's a dairy producing feed or a farmer with cows on pasture land as part of the total farm operation. Future challenges will certainly abound in the livestock industry, whether it's trade-related, animal diseases, low prices, or regulatory in nature. All of those mentioned above will be in play. Regardless of these challenges, even though some of the farm policies may differ for livestock versus crop agriculture, these programs do matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Dr. Scott, or Dr. Brown, pardon me.
Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Costa, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify regarding the current financial situation for livestock producers. I'm an agricultural economist at the University of Missouri and have worked extensively on livestock and dairy policy issues. The previous decade has resulted in the best and worst of times for the livestock sector. 2006 livestock cash receipts totaled $118 billion and nearly doubled to over $212 billion in 2014. Feed costs skyrocketed over the last decade as weather and other factors drove tight feed supplies. Purchased feed expenses doubled from $31 billion in 2006 to $64 billion in 2014. USDA currently estimates both will move lower this year. Feed cost, weather, and disease issues placed meat availability at a 23-year low in 2014. Meat consumption peaked at 220 pounds in 2007 and fell below 200 pounds in 2014. 2016 per capita meat consumption will show that 1/2 of the 20-pound decline has been recovered, which has led to lower livestock prices. The extremes of 2009 and 2014 have shown the highs to be breathtakingly high, while the lows have been desperately low, making risk management important. Droughts in major cow-calf regions contributed to record cattle prices in 2014 and 15. Markets have fallen substantially from the records, yet 2016 will still have positive returns for cow-calf producers. The 1 million head annual growth in cows this year was the largest in over 2 decades. Beef production expansion will likely lead to even lower cattle prices. 2014 hog returns hit record levels as feed costs eased and disease dramatically cut pigs per litter. As the sector recovered, production has grown, and hog prices have declined by more than 30%. All milk prices hit a record of $25.70 a hundred in 2014, but recently fell to $15.30 with the March information, a level we haven't seen since 2010. Current price information shows further declines will occur. And two factors have driven those lower milk prices. Reduced U.S. dairy exports have meant increased dairy product supplies on domestic markets. Second, milk production expansion has continued despite low returns. April milk production up 1.2% over a year ago, and the cow herd has expanded by over 22,000 head since the beginning of this year. Why has milk output grown when milk returns suggest contraction? During the 80s and 90s, there were more farmers with higher costs that exited during tough times. Today's operations have larger fixed costs, which makes their exit difficult. Since 2000, annual milk production has only declined twice, while it declined 5 times over the 86 to 99 period. If true, the only way out of low returns is for demand growth. There's been much discussion that the margin protection program is not providing a strong enough safety net. Before examining the MPP, it is important to understand that it is extremely difficult to construct a stronger safety net for dairy farmers while reducing federal spending remains a priority. CBO estimates FY16 federal outlays at $42 million, and USDA estimates 2016 dairy cash receipts will total $33.2 billion, a drop of over $16 billion from 2014. Identifying a safety net program that can moderate a $16 billion drop in cash receipts, yet only cost the government $42 million is a large challenge. Lower feed costs have resulted in the MPP margin falling far less than the milk price decline. A comparison between the cost of corn production and the decline in corn prices is instructive. AMS reports Minneapolis corn prices fell from $7.15 to $3.23 per bushel over the March 2013 to March 2016 period. The large decline in corn prices is helpful to dairy producers, yet this direct comparison of corn prices may mask some effects. The Economic Research Service estimates that 63% of Wisconsin dairy feed costs are homegrown harvested feed compared to 26% in California. ERS corn production costs have changed little over the 2013 to 2016 crop seasons. The difference in the cost of growing feed needs and the decline in crop prices may be one of the reasons why producers have struggled with MPP. The feed cost coefficients used in the formula were reduced by 10% during the Farm Bill debate. Record crop prices and high crop price projections drove the change. This change lessened the effect of feed prices on the MPP formula and reduced federal outlays. Without this adjustment, the feed cost decline would have offset more of the milk price decline. More work is needed to help producers think through the risk management versus program return maximization facets of policy. 2016 MPP participation has moved to lower levels of margin coverage when producers may be better served to participate at higher levels. Mr. Chairman, thanks for the opportunity to discuss the many issues facing the livestock and dairy industries today.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Mr. Zimmerman.
Good morning, Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Costa. Good morning, Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Costa, and members of the subcommittee. My name is John Zimmerman, and I'm a turkey farmer from Northfield, Minnesota, raising approximately 4 million pounds per year. I'm the past president of the Minnesota Turkey Growers Association, as well as a board member of the National Turkey Federation, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the 63,000 men and women that put their boots on every day to keep the turkey industry working. Our industry raises approximately 238 million turkeys annually, and USDA's latest forecast puts 2016 turkey production at an all-time record of 6.4 billion pounds, 14% above 2015. This year, the turkey industry has made significant strides and learned a lot in recovering from high-path avian influenza after suffering through the worst animal disease outbreak in U.S. history last year. However, our preparation was tested earlier this year in Indiana when a small outbreak occurred in a commercial turkey flock. This outbreak was small precisely because of the lessons we've learned, the most important of which is that immediate action needs to be taken at the local level to limit virus spread. No matter how good the intentions are at the state and federal level, industry must be given clear permission to act within minutes, not hours or days, to protect other farms from becoming infected. I must emphasize the need for rapid stamping out procedures and methods that ensure humane treatment while eliminating virus spread. Currently, there is no one method that achieves perfect results in all circumstances. NTF is deeply appreciative of the indemnification program implemented by USDA APHIS and strongly supported by Congress that helped us manage through this crisis. I would be remiss if I did not take a moment to personally thank my fellow Minnesotan, Congressman Colin Peterson, on behalf of myself, NTF, and the entire turkey industry for all you did for us last year. Thank you. Finally, the $1 billion in losses are well documented. In order to prevent future outbreaks, the U.S. needs to adopt a forward-looking mandatory animal pest and disease prevention program designed to limit the impacts of foreign zoonotic diseases on livestock and poultry producers. We look forward to working with Congress to accomplish this. All poultry exports were severely damaged by the trade restrictions that resulted from the 2015 high-path outbreak. Specifically, last year turkey exports declined 34%, and over 33 countries enacted some form of ban on U.S. poultry. Without the hard work of APHIS, it could have been a lot worse. They reopened closed markets as well as continue to establish protocols that will limit bans to regional levels in the future. We also continue to see high-path outbreaks in Europe, Asia, and South America, and now is the time to re-engage with our trade partners to discuss how HPAI can be treated moving forward. This is a global disease, and working with the government, we can develop a plan that minimizes export disruptions now. With regards to non-scientific trade barriers, it is important that USDA's FAS continue to work with both APHIS and the turkey industry to fully understand how we differ from chicken and livestock production. For example, while never covered under the U.S. cool regulations, turkey has now become subjected to cool-like regulations by both Korea and South Africa, who banned U.S. turkey raised and processed in the U.S. just because it was hatched outside the U.S. This is not science-based and is a problem for many companies that hope to expand sales into these promising growth markets. Finally, we support TPP as an important step forward in reducing trade barriers and opening new markets to the turkey industry, and we encourage Congress to approve this agreement as soon as possible. Recently, USDA proposed a rule to amend the organic livestock and poultry production requirements based on recommendations by the National Organic Standards Board. NTF is concerned about the potential disruptions to existing organic producers and their supply chains, as well as the impacts this proposed rule may have on ensuring that animal health is fully protected. Before moving forward with the rule, the turkey industry feels that USDA should conduct a thorough assessment of the cost of compliance, increased animal health and welfare risks, and alternatives for existing organic growers, producers, and supply chains to ensure minimal impact. 6 years ago, USDA proposed sweeping rule changes on farmer contracting. With the expiration of a congressional prohibition on implementing these changes, USDA is once again threatening to fundamentally change the rules by which our members operate. We believe that the changes would increase costs, reduce productivity, and possibly lead to increased live production ownership by integrated poultry companies to the detriment of independent farmers like myself. We support the continued prohibition of USDA's implementation of these proposed changes. A recent report by the National Academy of Sciences found that food made from genetically engineered crops are as safe to eat as those made from conventional crops. Regarding food labeling, NTF actively supports two critical components of any GMO bill that comes out of Congress. One, that the bill maintains federal preemption for meat and poultry labeling, which is already regulated by USDA FSIS, and two, that it ensures that animals fed GE feed should not have to be labeled GE. We look forward to a bill that prevents a patchwork of state rules that create a labeling nightmare for food producers, but these two conditions must be met. Finally, we have a worker shortage all across this country, and meat and poultry producers are no different in feeling the pain of this shortage. The turkey industry supports immigration reform that addresses the needs of year-round meat and poultry producers and processors. Our members need access to a pool of legal, general labor immigrant workers and a visa program that could address these needs. However politically difficult it seems, we must get this done. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the U.S. turkey industry and the issues impacting our businesses. We'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. Mr. Mooney.
Thank you, Chairman Rouser, Ranking Member Costa, and distinguished members. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before the subcommittee, and I want to thank Congresswoman Hartzler for the kind introduction. To be clear, times are tough on America's dairy farms. For the second year in a row, USDA projections indicate that revenues from milk sales will drop this year to $31.5 billion, the second lowest level in the last decade, and more than $20 billion plunge from 2014's high. As U.S. milk production has grown and we have had to rely more heavily on world markets, our fortunes are now more closely tied to the extreme volatility that are a feature of global commodity markets. Because of the volatility in both milk and feed, we must continue to reassess our risk management tools. For the most of the 8 years that I've been chairman of National Milk, I've worked with our member cooperatives and dairy producers to build a better safety net.
Our request to Congress after the economic disaster our industry suffered in 2009 was to create a risk management tool that would provide protection against the prolonged and catastrophic cost-price squeeze we had experienced. In the 2014 Farm Bill, Congress created the Margin Protection Program. Approximately 23,000 dairy producers are in the program, representing 80% of the milk supply. In 2015, U.S. dairy producers paid $73 million in premiums and fees to USDA, while USDA only paid out $700,000 under the program. This year, dairy farmers have paid in another $23 million. I firmly believe MPP is the right dairy program for the future. That said, our experience to date is that MPP is not completely fulfilling its intended objective as an effective safety net. But we remain confident that the improvements can be made by the Congress for this still evolving program. For many farmers, the current program is simply not enough to protect them in this economic environment. Since the Farm Bill was signed into law, MPP margins have fallen 52%, with further declines expected. While MPP is similar to the initial proposal put forward by National Milk, the plan was altered during the Farm Bill process. One change reduced the feed cost component of the margin, so the current formula no longer reflects the true cost of feeding a herd. Second, while the feed cost component was changed, farmers' premiums were not, when they should have been reduced to accommodate the reduced feed component. MPP has been less effective as a result. I have heard from many dairy farmers that their financial challenges will only increase if the prices do not improve before 2017. And we continue to discuss ways to improve MPP with our member cooperatives, USDA, and the Congress. Clearly, adjustments to the feed cost calculation of the farmer-paid premiums would improve MPP's effectiveness as a safety net for all dairy producers. The feasibility and timing of such adjustments are issues we want to explore with the committee. Our industry is also impacted by numerous other policy issues that are described more fully in my submitted comments, but I want to highlight two of them today. First is the critical importance of Congress acting immediately to pass legislation to ensure that a single federal standard is established on labeling of genetically modified foods. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is that Congress resolve this matter before July 1, when the Vermont law takes effect. Failure by Congress to address this issue threatens the viability not only of my farm, but also the 30,000 farmers I represent. It also threatens our ability to feed the world's growing population. Trade is another area of importance to dairy farmers. Our nation has gone from exporting less than $1 billion worth of products in 2000 to more than $5.2 billion of exports in 2015, an increase of 435%. This enormous growth can be largely attributed to the market-opening free trade agreements negotiated by our government. We support the TPP agreement because it can help U.S. dairy exports continue to grow in key world markets. But in order for farmers to realize any benefit, important implementation and enforcement issues must be addressed as Congress prepares to consider TPP. Separately and finally, any trade agreement with the European Union must first prioritize how to tackle our trade deficit with Europe while also addressing the non-tariff barriers, like geographic indicators and sanitary barriers, that the EU uses to limit our access. The EU has not demonstrated a good faith commitment to open agricultural trade. The U.S. must proceed cautiously by securing clear commitments from the EU to guard against the imposition of future trade barriers. And Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for holding this important hearing. America's dairy farm families stand ready to help this committee as you review current policies and consider new legislation that impacts our industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mooney. Mr. Herring.
Council Board of Directors from North Carolina and Vice President of TDM Farms, a sow fair to finish operation, and a hog sled incorporated out of North Carolina. The U.S. pork industry is in good economic shape after a couple of years of dealing with disease issues and weather-related high feed grain prices. It now appears to be moving into a period of cautious, calculated expansion. Pork production is forecast by USDA to increase this year by 2% to almost 25 billion pounds, and in 2017 by 2.6% to more than 25.5 billion pounds. Of course, producers' fortunes can be affected for good or for ill by any number of factors, some controllable, some not so controllable, some such as disease and weather. I was going to first address an opportunity that would be very positive for hog farmers like me and that Congress can control, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. But another issue recently has come up that, if not addressed, would wipe out any benefits we gain from TPP. Pork producers are very concerned about the so-called GIPSA rules. As many of you know, the rule was born out of the 2008 Farm Bill, which included 5 specific issues, mostly related to the poultry industry Congress wanted USDA to address. But the Grain Inspection, Packers and Stockyards Administration in 2010 proposed an expansive rule that would have had a significant negative effect on the livestock industry. A November 2010 Informa economic study of the rule found it would have cost the pork industry more than $330 million annually. Tens of thousands of comments, including 16,000 from pork producers, were filed in opposition to the rule, and Congress several times included riders in USDA's annual appropriations bill to prevent it from finalizing the regulation. Such an amendment was not included in the USDA's fiscal 2016 bill. Now the agency is moving forward with the rule, and we have grave concerns it will mirror the 2010 proposal. If it does, the livestock industry will be fundamentally and negatively changed, and the increased exports and jobs created from TPP will or could be negated. Additionally, the fact that we have to deal with this GIPSA rule issue is diverting valuable resources away from the pork industry's top priority, approval of TPP. TPP, the benefits of which will exceed all past free trade agreements, represents a great opportunity for U.S. pork producers and for the entire U.S. economy. TPP includes the United States and 11 Pacific Rim countries. Those nations include nearly 500 million consumers and represent 40% of the world's GDP. The agreement has become the de facto global trade vehicle, and other countries in the region are already lining up to get on it. Because of other Asia-Pacific trade agreements are being negotiated without the United States can't afford either economically or geopolitically to walk away from the fastest growing region in the world. And to give you an idea of the importance of free trade agreements to the U.S. pork producers, the United States now exports more pork to 20 countries with which it has FTAs than to the rest of the whole world. Congress must pass the TPP, and it must be done soon. Finally, a challenge that would be out of everyone's control, but that could be tempered through preparedness, is a foreign animal disease outbreak, specifically an outbreak of foot and mouth disease. An FDM outbreak in this country would be economically devastating to U.S. pork producers and other food producers. USDA and the livestock industry have been working on plans to combat an outbreak, but the only practical way is through vaccination. Unfortunately, we currently don't have the ability to produce the number of doses needed for an initial outbreak with the capacity to produce more. The U.S. pork industry believes, consistent with Homeland Security Presidential Directive 9, that an adequate FMD vaccine bank must be established. This will require an offshore vendor-maintained bank that would have available antigen concentrate to protect against all of the 23 most common FMD types currently circulating in the world. A vendor-managed inventory of 10 million doses, which is the estimated need for just the first 2 weeks of an outbreak. And a contract with an international manufacturer or manufacturers for the served capacity to produce at least 40 million additional doses. Given the cost of dealing with an FMD outbreak and the economic impact on the livestock industry and indeed on the entire U.S. economy, Congress should appropriate enough money to set up such a vaccine bank. Those are just a few of the opportunities and challenges that pork producers face. I thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Herring. Mr. Bruner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Good morning to everyone. Always at the mercy of Mother Nature, our industry is rapidly recovering from extensive drought. Herd rebuilding and expansion are taking place at a rate where U.S. cattle numbers will soon be equal to 2012. Additionally, American beef producers continue to be more efficient in producing beef. Today, we can produce the same amount of beef that we produced in 1977 with only 1/3 of the land and cattle. The beef value supply chain is always focused on the consumer. Cow-calf ranchers tell their seed stock suppliers what they need and also ask their stocker and feeder calf buyers what they will pay the most for. Cattle feeders likewise look to packer processors for signals of greatest value, who in turn have an ear for retail and food service needs. Cattle prices have been the topic of focus for NCBA and our members. In 2015, we saw record high cattle prices, but soon those started back down. One factor was the overall increase in overall protein supplies. In 2015, U.S. per capita red meat and poultry supplies increased by nearly 10 pounds per person. In addition, the strong U.S. dollar impacted our ability to shift beef to our international customers. All this additional supply puts downward pressure on the markets, but we're used to the ups and downs of the cattle cycle. In order to manage this cycle, we need risk management tools that work. We currently rely on market forums like CME Group's cattle futures contracts in adding transparency to our price discovery process. Changing technologies and a transition to automated trading in commodity futures have increased market volatility, making interpretation of those price signals different than what we are accustomed to in the past. The integrity of our market forums is very important, for without futures contract integrity, our industry will abandon their use. We have recognized this volatility and are working directly with the CME Group to find ways to address it. We have a joint NCBA-CME working group which is analyzing potential changes, such as slowing down the market, to help ensure a level playing field for producers who are using these tools to manage their price risks. Today, we ask for no direct action from our government in our cattle marketing systems and forums. In fact, I'm concerned at some of the action that we have seen from USDA in the Senate. Secretary Vilsack has announced that he's going to dust off the proposed GIPSA marketing rule that resulted from language included in the 2008 Farm Bill. This is concerning to us because bipartisan efforts already resulted in appropriations language which defunded any additional work on or implementation of the ideas that were included in that draft rule. The proposed GIPSA rule would have made USDA the ultimate arbiter of how cattle are marketed. We urge USDA to enforce the Packers and Stockyards Act. We do not need them dictating how we can or cannot market our cattle. Our industry has worked for years in developing new and innovative ways to market cattle. Alternative marketing arrangements have been studied by USDA and independent groups, and the results show that these alternatives benefit producers and consumers alike. Any congressional or executive action to interfere will only add to our price problems, not solve them. Solving our price problems relies on addressing the true issues of consequence in our industry. We have capitalized on the growing demand for U.S. beef overseas, and Japan has become our leading export market. But Australia now has a 10% tariff advantage over us, resulting in a $300 million loss to our industry. The tariff advantage for Australia will continue to grow until we pass TPP. In closing, I would say you could also help our bottom line by easing the regulatory burden our industry is under, taking action to reform the Endangered Species Act, and helping us keep EPA at bay will go a long way in easing the pressures on our industry. Again, thank you very much for this opportunity to be with you today, and I will be happy to receive any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bruner. The chair would like to remind members that they will be recognized for questioning in order of seniority for members who were here at the start of the hearing. After that, members will be recognized in order of arrival. Appreciate the members' understanding. Understanding that Ranking Member Colin Peterson has another commitment he's got to get to, I'd be happy to yield at this time, Mr. Peterson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Mr. Zimmerman, you mentioned in your testimony that the USDA proposed rule on organic poultry is concern to you, I guess. Could you talk a bit more about the risks associated with this rule, your concerns, and Do you feel this rule would work counter to USDA's efforts to prevent another high-path outbreak?
Primary concerns do have to deal with the high-path outbreak. Here we are working with APHIS, trying to limit our exposure to waterfowl, rodents, other possibilities of bringing AI into our farms, and then AMS comes up with these new proposals that want us to increase the outside space required for organic production. It just doesn't make any sense that one part of USDA is telling us to keep our birds as safe as possible inside our barns, and the other group is saying, well, one segment of the industry needs this much greater space outside. So that's the greatest concern. And they're also admitting that this will increase mortality, some of these organic rules, and that's counterintuitive to what we're trying to do.
Are they listening?
We hope so. I guess that's part of the reason we're here today.
All right, good. Dr. Brown, you've done a lot of analysis on milk and MPP. What would you say to some of the producers that think that they were better off under MILC, number one? And number two, in your analysis, there's been talk about this feed cost adjuster issue. And it just looks to me like there's a bigger discrepancy between whether somebody grows their feed and buys their feed versus what region of the country they're in. So would you address those two issues?
Yes, I think number one, when you look at the old MILC program versus MPP, I have said all along that for those producers that would have signed up at the 6 or 650 range for MPP, I believe the return to them is larger than what they would have experienced under MILC. Getting them to sign up for that level, I think, has been somewhat the challenge that we face. I look, and in 2016, almost 130 billion pounds of our milk signed up at $4. That's a safety net about as firm as this tabletop. It doesn't provide much help. So we've, I think, done a poor job of educating on this idea of insurance versus program maximization, and it's an area we need to work on. But I also hear from producers who have felt like MILC was a better tool. Sometimes I will say it might have paid sooner, but it only offset 45% of the price decline. I don't know of any producer that would like to receive only a 45% offset once we get to the trigger. I think when you look at MPP, and there has been a lot of discussion about feed costs, and we all know from the debate on the Farm Bill, we had feed cost discussion all the way back in the 2014 Farm Bill debate. And it does seem like we have a lot of differences in terms of feed costs by operation. Those that are growing a lot of their own feed, I think frankly did better in a high feed price environment because they were able to use their own harvested feedstuffs. However, those that were buying a lot of their feed saw more of the full impact of the record corn prices that we would have saw during the very dry weather of 2012 and 2013. So perhaps there is some ability to think about ways to modify the formula depending on whether you grow a lot of feed or you don't grow a lot of feed. I'm not so certain that it's a regional issue as much as it is how that farm actually looks from terms of the amount of feed it's grown versus it buys from the marketplace.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Mooney, why are bankers not requiring dairy farmers to buy up insurance? Crop farmers would never get by with that. Is that going to change now that we're in a tighter margin situation, or do you know anything about that?
Well, I think it will change, and I haven't spoke to a banker directly, but coming off of 2014 when margins were really good, you went into 2015 with strong balance sheets, and then disaster hit in 2015, and the results of 14 on our bottom line mask some of the problems we had in 2015. And if you go back and you look at the results of the margin protection program, there was 263, I think, farms that was paid out. And if the feed cost adjuster had been the way National Milk had presented it, there had been 8,500 producers receive a payment. And I think farmers look at those things when they look at whether to get involved next year. They see very few farmers receive money in 15, so they take that into consideration when they're looking at it. But I do think, to your specific question, I think once it's more of a proven program and we go through some of these low down cycles like we're going through now, I think that will be required by banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your accommodating me.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I'll now yield myself 5 minutes. Mr. Bruner, my line of questioning is going to focus on this proposed GIPSA rules that we have on the table. The cattle industry has put in place the alternative marketing arrangements, or what's known as AMAs. Would the proposed GIPSA rules make AMAs obsolete? I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The proposed GIPSA rule would extremely complicate and outlaw many of the alternative marketing arrangements. Our industry believes that these value-based marketing arrangements that we have done much to improve the overall quality and demand for beef over the years. I can relate personally from our family's operation that we rely on a value-based marketing arrangement with our packer processor that has helped us over time achieve premiums to the cash market of $30 to $50 a head consistently. We believe that's responding to consumer demand, and we rely very much on this marketing arrangement. So the alternative marketing arrangements are very beneficial to our industry. The GIPSA marketing rule would threaten those.
Mr. Herring, in your written testimony, you mentioned the industry has plans to add 4 pork packing plants in the United States in the next couple of years. Obviously, these are huge job creators and economic stimulators. And although we don't know exactly what the final GIPSA rule is going to look like, with the possible decrease in marketing with the possible decrease in marketing agreements, have an impact on whether or not the industry goes forth with building these plants?
Congressman, there's no doubt that these proposed new GIPSA rules could delay or even stop some of these potential plants. There's 3 plants under construction today. There's 1 plant that's trying to get located. Maybe there's 4 under construction today. But I think the better question is we need to ask, why are new plants getting built? New plants are getting built because the U.S. pork producers produce the safest, highest quality product in the world. We are the best at what we do in the world. We produce pork 4 times cheaper than Japan, 2.5 times cheaper than China. It's a very innovative industry. These GIPSA rules are very concerning because they are so vague. It's almost a trial lawyer's playground. I work for a family business, Congressman, that designs and builds swine production facilities all over the world. Countries like Russia, China, Mexico, Poland, Chile. All these countries are striving to be like our industry. And through our current rules and regulations, our industry has been able to grow. So I don't see why we need to change anything we're doing today. Thank you, Chairman.
I yield my time. Let's see, Ms. Plaskett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, gentlemen. I have a general question that I'm hoping that anyone in the group can answer or give us their thoughts on. And this is related to EPA regulations. As livestock producers, can you explain the regulatory challenges that you face within each part of the operations that you have? And, with that, I'm really trying to understand what EPA could be doing better to recognize the challenges that you have in your industry and in your operations, and understanding those practices in their own regulatory framework and how they put regulations forward that may make it more difficult and more challenging for you in your own industry.
Well, I'll take the first try at that.
Okay.
The Waters of the U.S. rule is foremost in mind as an initiative from EPA that was would be very damaging to the cattle and beef industry. America's farmers and ranchers pride themselves as stewards of not only the land, but all of the resources on that land. We believe that the best way to manage and preserve that land is best managed at the ranch and the local level. The waters of the U.S. rule would be a massive federal overreach and would be very damaging to our industry.
My understanding is that it goes as far as to reaching into dry creek beds and others, and that's really going to be detrimental to the work of some of the livestock owners.
Absolutely. It would go far beyond navigable waters of the U.S. and jurisdictionally and include intermittent streams and even dry.
Well, how can EPA strike that balance? I mean, are you meeting regularly with them? Are people from different associations having discussions with them? Do you feel that they're understanding and hearing what your concerns are in a market that's already very, very tight for you all?
We believe our organization has taken initiatives and outreach to work with EPA. They have, to date, we don't believe they have been as receptive to our arguments and our information as necessarily would be.
Okay, Mr. Mooney, did you have something to add on that?
Yes, we have sat down with EPA, and we've got what you call in the Dairy Industry Innovation Center, where you bring together farmer organizations and processor organizations, and we've sat down with EPA to talk to them about things like waters of the U.S. and what effect it would have on us. We've actually came up with a plan to reduce greenhouse gases by 25% by 2020. So we're trying to get ahead of some of this stuff and going in and having a conversation with EPA to see if what we're doing fits what they would, rather than work at it from a regulatory standpoint, work with them when they tell us what's coming down the road, how we can fit what we're doing into what they're going to recommend. We also have started a group called, what we call Nutrient is the name of the company, to where several co-ops have financed this new company to come together to try to find innovative ways to use animal waste and animal manure in ways that we haven't ever thought about before. So it's going to cost quite a bit of money to do it, but cooperatives and farmers are putting resources into this so we can find ways to get ahead of some of the EPA rules.
Thank you. I'm noticed, and I'm very aware of how drought and for the farmers and particularly livestock owners in the Virgin Islands, where we have the Centipole bull, as well as our pork, there have been a huge issues that they've had related to drought. And I know that, when we talk about the TPP, that as well is something that some of you all are really concerned about, and if Congress doesn't act to pass it, what that will ceding market share that some of you may have in an already market dealing with disease and drought and some of the other areas. Do any of you have any thoughts about, particularly Mr. Herring, Mr. Mooney, about how passage of TPP or not passing that would affect your industry?
Thank you. Currently today, there's about $48 per head of value added to every hog marketed in the United States because of exports. If we're not able to pass the TPP, other countries are working with Asian countries, and our industry will start to decline, and we will not be able to increase the value of the animals that we're producing today. The 20 countries we have free trade agreements today, 20 countries, we sell them more pork than we sell the rest of the world. So anywhere the U.S. pork industry has a free trade agreement, we have been super successful, and they have created a tremendous demand for our product.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Hartzler.
Thank you. Well, I've really enjoyed the testimony today. It seems like we've had a recurring theme of the TPP and GIPSA and some of the regulations, GMO labeling. I know I've been a lifelong cattle producer, but I didn't know that we were producing a third more cattle or beef product than we are with a third less land and a third cattle, so, since 1977. So that was impressive there. And concerned to hear that you project lower cattle prices. Dr. Brown, that doesn't look good for our cows at home. But my question today is about the veterinary feed directive. And this final rule is scheduled to take effect in December of this year, and producers in my district are concerned with how these new regulations will be affecting their operations. I've had several conversations with several cattlemen, specifically at home. So specifically, I've heard the regulatory burdens in the VFD will force farm supply stores to stop selling products like medicated milk replacer, which is used on calves during certain times to protect the baby animals against illnesses like pneumonia. So as I understand, the VFD, 1,000 cow dairy and little Johnny with one show steer will be regulated under the same rules. And the VFD will make it extremely costly and difficult for small farmers and young kids with FFA and 4-H projects to access critical feed products like medicated milk replacer. So Randy, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this rule first, and like to learn more about how the veterinary feed directive will be applied to products like medicated milk replacer. And then I'd like to open this up to the whole panel to talk about other concerns you may or may not have with the VFD and any specific provisions or concern in the directive that could be tweaked to improve the implementation. So, Randy?
Well, as you might expect, any extra, more layered regulations is very concerning for dairy producers and probably all livestock producers. And this probably affects dairy less than it does maybe other livestock groups, because as you're aware well of, our feed that goes into the dairy cow don't have antibiotics in it anyway. We test our milk daily for antibiotics, so there's no antibiotics in dairy feed. It will affect the milk replacer that we feed our calves if it has antibiotics in it, and what you will have to do then is work with a veterinarian to get a veterinarian prescription to use that. Now, one of the things the dairy industry has done is we've came up with what we call the FARM program, Farmers Assuring Responsible Management, and that's our new animal care program that's been in existence about the last 3 or 4 years. And in that program, you have to have a veterinary client-patient relationship. So that relationship through this program will actually be, I think, easier for dairy producers to deal with, because we have that relationship ongoing, and it's something that we have to have reapproved, re-signed every year. But it's just another layer of regulations that we're going to have to deal with. But I don't see in the dairy industry it being as big a deal maybe as in the livestock or poultry industry.
Maybe I ask Mr. Bruner this. How often would a beef producer or even Mr. Herring, pork producers, have to get that prescription from the veterinarian? Can you get a blanket one for 1 year, or is this every time you want to give the medicated feed, you have to go back to your local veterinarian?
The short answer to that would be, I believe 6 months is what's commonly being said today would be the length of a prescription. Our organization, on behalf of our industry, has been working with FDA and the development of the veterinary feed directive. We want to be part of the solution. We understand the discussion on antimicrobial resistance that's taking place. We also understand the very great need that all livestock industry has in the availability of all the technologies in the tool chest, if you will, to ensure the safety and the availability of the global food supply. And all that said, there are specific technologies that come under scrutiny of the veterinary feed directive that are ionophores. These are classified as antibiotics. They have no use in human medicine, but they're very important technologies in the efficiency of production of beef. And we're currently working with FDA to try and identify some ways to continue the use and the availability of those technologies.
10 seconds. Mr. Herring, you want to add anything?
The pork industry is in concert with the 209 and the 213 rules that are coming in January. I'm sure there'll be some hiccups just because there's employees, there's people working, somebody will miss something. But first and foremost, we're trying to raise safe, healthy pork. And the antibiotics are a tool that we definitely need to be able to assure that happens.
You bet. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Costa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple questions. First to Mr. Mooney and Dr. Scott Brown. When we worked together in the Farm Bill on the MPP program, the economic analysis reflected an assumption that the so-called sweet spot, as had been discussed before, were about $6 to $6.50 range, and the premiums were therefore optimized at that level. Of course, my friend and colleague Congressman Peterson said maybe don't do farm bills when prices are higher. But I'd like to ask, in your view, is that still the case? Because our California situation, and it was noted about differences in regional production and the size of dairies. I looked it up, and we've had 38 dairies out of almost 1,500 dairies in California that have purchased the additional protection. So 38 out of almost 1,500 dairies is a small number, I would argue. Mr. Mooney, Dr. Brown, would you care to comment?
Well, I'll let Scott clean me up. I think the cost of a sweet spot, and I agree that I even said that up in front of talking to some groups, that was the sweet spot. But I think when I was talking about that, that was in relation to probably what National Milk at the time was talking about as the feed cost. That was prior to the 10% reduction in feed cost.
Which has changed.
Yeah, which that's right. So you know, it probably should have changed the rates when you changed the feed cost, because the two are correlated. And I think when you...
But some argue that may not do much.
Yeah, but I think when you get under at $6.50 and you look at 10% in feed cost and you look at $10 feed cost, it's $1 a hundredweight. So if you're down at that level, it makes a big difference.
Because of my time, Dr. Brown.
Well, so I think when we debated the Farm Bill, we certainly didn't expect feed costs to go as low as they have today. So number one, I think that probably has some effect relative to where we were in terms of the so-called sweet spot. I do think we have to be extremely careful about what level of protection we want to provide. Too high of protection creates a lot of excess supplies for us to deal with, and we've had programs like that in the past, and we weren't very happy with those either. So finding that in between, I think, has been very difficult. I think the knowledge that we have today of how feed markets have moved might suggest slightly higher protection is needed than where we were when we debated this Farm Bill.
And maybe take another look at it then.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I want to switch here, Dr. Zimmerman, to some of our issues dealing with the poultry industry. You mentioned in your testimony the result of last year's high-path avian influenza that created havoc in different parts of the country, that several countries, South Korea, South Africa, have placed new restrictions on poultry imported from this country that is not born, raised, and slaughtered in the United States. What is the impact of these adverse regulations?
Well, the South African one is the most, forgive my bluntness, silly. We receive a lot of poults or baby turkeys that are hatched in Canada and transported across the border at day of age, and then we raise them and grow them out and process them in the United States. Those birds cannot be sold to South Africa, whereas the same poult or baby turkey hatched in Canada and stays in Canada can be sold to South Africa. These poults that come across the border from Canada are a lot of times mixed in the processing plants, and they can't be kept separate. And so anything that has this tint of Canadianness in it can no longer be marketed to South Africa. So it's just a silly trade barrier that affects the whole industry.
This is a non-tariff barrier that,
yes,
in effect, is made for economic reasons as it relates to a particular country.
Correct. And it was thrown in at the last minute, and I think if NTF had been consulted heavier with the people negotiating the trade deal, we could have nipped this in the bud before it happened.
So what remedy are you offering or suggesting that the subcommittee look at to try to address this issue?
Make sure NTF is involved in understanding the difference that the turkey industry faces compared to the chicken and other livestock industries, and work with us to hopefully change that rule.
All right. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got to go back to my other subcommittee, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, appreciate very much all your testimony this morning. It's been very informative and very important issues that impact agriculture and its ability to be successful. So thank you very much. Really looking forward to this opportunity today because I have a burning question that has been raised by some of my cattle producers. So I was hoping that a couple of you could address this issue, maybe Mr. Bruner and Dr. Anderson or whoever would like to, maybe Dr. Brown. After the repeal of COOL, which, as you know, in the cattle industry, there's some people for and some against that. Some folks have brought a concern to me that now Canadian and Mexican cattle can come into the United States for a certain period of time, be slaughtered and be sold as U.S. beef, and that any benefit from a TPP would then be more directly benefit Canada and Mexico, not U.S. producers. And they've already seen a price decrease, I think, because of this situation. So is this in your estimation, is this the right conclusion to come to? Was the cause and effect correct when we get rid of COOL, then that automatically is not a benefit to U.S. producers? Does that make sense?
What I think you're asking is, has the importation of cattle increased since country of origin labeling is no longer the law of the land? And I guess the North American beef industry is highly integrated. We utilize on the U.S. side of the border, we utilize feeder cattle from Mexico. Nearly an average is about 1 million head a year that come in from Mexico are part of our industry that help with the feeder supply. From Canada, it depending on the seasonally and also the situation of moisture. Live cattle, feeder cattle, and also slaughter cattle can come down from Canada. The North American industry is highly integrated, and so we have not seen any increase since the dismissal of COOL, and I'm not sure exactly how that would tie into TPP. TPP, although Canada and Mexico are signatories to that agreement, would be a far greater benefit for our industry in helping us level the playing field of the tariff rate duty that we're paying into Japan. Currently, we're paying 38%, Australia only 27%, and that disparity will continue to escalate until we sign TPP.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anybody else care to comment?
I'd probably just make one comment too. Along with that, we have been importing fewer cattle, and it's related to it relates to drought, weather conditions, grazing conditions up there, and also changes in their own infrastructure within their own industries. As they build more packing plants in Mexico, we think that's going to continue to keep more cattle down there and reduce that supply that could come here of the live cattle.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that helps. I appreciate that. There's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of things that can impact cattle prices, and certainly it is an integrated industry in all of North America. Just real quickly, Mr. Mooney, you talked a little bit about the MPP. We talked a lot about the feed provisions in that. But you also had some other suggestions for improvement, and in a short time, a lot of, I think, you mentioned farmer-paid premiums as one thing. Are there any other ideas that you might have to improve the MPP?
Well, I think that's the two major ones, is making sure the feed cost adjustment's fine. There's discussion out there on regional feed cost adjusters. I don't think that's the right way to go personally, because you get into all kinds of regional differences. And if you do go with a regional feed cost adjuster, you'd almost have to go with regional milk prices, because milk prices are different all over the country. But I think the two is probably, probably the other one is looking at different sizes of producers. If you're wanting to talk, if you're talking about getting more people involved, and Congressman Peterson said this, some of the smaller producers aren't involved in this. The rates has actually went up on the smaller producers because there was a deduction the first year, and if there was a way of having lower rates for smaller producers to get them more incentivized to be part of it, that might help there.
Well, thank you very much. Again, I appreciate all your testimony. It's been great, and thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Yoho.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate everybody being here, and I've got so many questions and so few time. TPP, I know we all need trade, and we all want fair and balanced trade. We want good trade, and it's so important that we have that. Mr. Bruner, and congratulations on your new post at the NCBA.
Thank you.
Is anybody in the cattle industry, or Mr. Herring in the pork industry, or Mr. Zimmerman in the turkey, and Mr. Mooney in the dairy industry, while we're waiting for TPP to come across and get approved? As you brought up, Australia was ahead of the curve. They went and negotiated with Japan. Is anybody in our industries doing that today while we're waiting on TPP? Because I felt like we sat and just kind of watched the world go by, and Australia jumped the gun, and they did good for their country. Is anybody doing that?
Well, the Canadians are working to get a unilateral or a bilateral agreement with Japan in our absence.
What about us with our trade negotiators?
Our trade negotiators negotiated the best trade access we have ever been able to achieve with with TPP.
Right.
Our current tariff rate of 38% would level with Australia and all the other member nations, and it would decline to 9% in the 16 years of phase-in over that. So that's by far the...
But instead of waiting for that to pass, was anybody being proactive and trying to get the trade agreement, just a bilateral one, so that we could be, I don't want to say like Australia, but, benefiting our producers in this country instead of waiting on this big multinational trade agreement?
We had a bilateral that was signed with Japan, I believe, back in the 90s, and in the early part of my career. It was hard to get the Japanese market opened, and when it did open, we had to pay that high tariff rate. Have been paying it ever since. Okay,
I just feel like we could have, our negotiators could have been a little bit more proactive, kind of like Australia did, or like you're saying, Canada is doing it now. In lieu of that, thinking about that, we heard about foot and mouth disease, as you guys brought up, and we know the threat of that. Is there any need to import beef from any country that might have FMD? Because we know if that got into this country, it would shut down our export industry down 100%. Right now, tomorrow, it would shut it down. Is there any need to import it? And if you could give me an economic impact on this country's ag sector, when you look at pork, beef, sheep, goats, all the feed, fertilizers that would be impacted. Any idea, Mr. Bruner?
Well, the Brazil-Argentina rule as proposed by USDA raises great concerns within our industry. We don't believe an adequate risk assessment has been made of the ability of those countries to certify their product coming into this country as fresh or fresh frozen product. We believe that risk assessment needs to be made, and in direct answer to your question of an economic analysis of the damage that would create, we have not seen that study from USDA. I'm not sure that it was ever been made.
The reports I've read is between $100 and $150 billion economic impact of this country. Mr. Herring, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, the ability or the devastation of foreign animal disease in this country is without a doubt the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and it's the one thing that when I meet with the bankers every year that I go, do I just need to get out of this business? I mean, it scares me to death. So we really need to keep pushing and get prepared.
All right, and, bringing that up, but going back to TPP, if we know that we're to come into this country and we're struggling to get that trade negotiation, we need to stop any country that maybe has that in their country to come here. And we talked about GIPSA, the Food Modernization Safety Act, EPA, all the regulations that come from these different agencies and the FDA. And recently, the USDA noticed a grant to help address the shortage of large animal veterinarians in rural areas. And this continues to be a common problem from report after report evaluating the veterinary profession. With additional regulations, like I mentioned from the FDA on the FFD, coming into effect early next year, the shortage for rural areas could become more problematic. From your perspective as the president of the NCBA, do you hear this concern from your membership, being concerned about current or future access to veterinarians in their rural areas?
Well, our industry certainly relies on the services of veterinaries, and beyond that, I can say that they're an integral part and support service to our industry. We want to make sure that there's adequate numbers of educated and trained large animal veterinarians to support our industry.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Yoho. I'd like to thank all the members of the panel for your testimony today. This has been very, very helpful. Great input for the record. And I might add, I think to sum all this up, federal government just needs to get out of your way and help open up your markets. Thank you again. Under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any question posed by a member. This hearing of the Subcommittee on Livestock and Foreign Agriculture is adjourned.